Welcome to Sew Very Easy. My name is Laura, and teaching the new generation sewing skills is not only important, but it's a lot of fun. It helps with many different skills, and it is fun and creative for them. Both boys and girls do love to be creative, and sewing is a perfect thing for them to learn how to do. Brady Malowski has written a really cute book on a young girl learning how to quilt. Let's check it out. The book, called Kristys Quilt, is based on a true story about a young girl who wants to learn to make a quilt for someone very special in her life. The book does come with a companion pattern and some helpful hints on how to get children interested in quilting. Let's make Kristys Quilt to go with the book. The fabric is from Northcott, and it's called Mermaid Wishes and Starfish. This is a nice fabric for little girls. It's got some fish and lots of sparkle fabric on it. If you're going to have a young man making this, he might be interested in doing sports fabric, food fabric, electronics fabrics, or even solids. It's a very simple pattern. You're going to need to start with 3 fat quarters and have them choose one fabric, and then from there pull in 2 fabrics that are going to match. The first thing we need to do is make sure that the fabric is pressed and we have no wrinkles in it. That gives them an opportunity to learn pressing and skills on how to handle an iron. When you do press fabric that has this little sparkle fabric on it, press it from the wrong side, and I would recommend using a spray starch. You can get spray starch right where you buy your laundry soap. Once the fabric has been pressed, we need to square up the edges. Trim out the selvages if they're still on. Just make sure all of the fabric is straight. Once they're cut all straight, we need to cut 1 strip from each of the fabrics. We're going to cut them along that long edge, which is that 21 inches. We need to cut a 3-inch strip. The rest of the fabric is going to be used for a border and backing. To cut that 3-inch strip, we can use the mat and a rotary cutter. If you think they're too young to use the cutter and the mat, you can draw straight lines and then have them cut them with scissors. Once we have that 21 inches by 3 inches cut out of the 3 fabrics, we need to cut these strips into 3-inch squares. Again, you can do this using the rotary cutter or draw lines at every 3 inches and have them cut them with the scissors. Another great chance for them to use a ruler and a little bit of math. We now have 21 3-inch squares of each of the 3 fabrics. The quilt is going to consist of 5 rows with 4 blocks in each row. And this is going to be a fun part because they're going to be able to rearrange them any way they want. And with 5 rows with 4 blocks in each means you're going to have 1 block left over. To stitch them together, you have a few options. You're going to start by putting 2 together. Then from there, you can put them together in a row or make 4 patches. Depending on the age, they can stitch them on the sewing machine. As quilters, we do like a 1/4 inch seam allowance, but just use the seam allowance that they're most comfortable using. You can also have them stitch them by hand, so it's a great project to take on the road if you're traveling. And there's no special arrangement. Whatever they like is going to be the right arrangement. I chose to sew this together in rows. So I did the 2 blocks together and then sewed those together, then put the rows together. Now you can have the seams going to one side, or if they're hand stitching them, you can have them press those seams open. Whatever is more comfortable for your child to do is the right way to do it. It's going to be somewhere between 10.5 inches by 13 inches. From here, we're going to put a border on. Choose one of the fabrics for the border. From the long side, cut 4 strips at 2 inches. It's going to be a big border, but it's easier to work with a big border and to trim it down than not have a piece that's long enough. We will need to sew these 2-inch strips on the outside of the quilt. But the first thing we need to do is make sure that the quilt is laying flat. The size is not important at this point. You can trim it down if you'd like, but as long as it is sitting flat, it's going to be easy for them to work with. If it's not laying flat, you're going to be able to just stretch it a little bit as you press it until it's nice and flat. It's more important that they learn to enjoy the experience than the perfection. To sew the borders on, I would recommend sewing the 2 long sides first. And because we're not going to worry about measurements, you don't have to worry about the measurements on the piece. Have the borders go a little bit bigger and stitch that border on. They're going to stop and start right at the end. We're going to trim off these little extras after. So put on the 2 long borders first. We can trim off the ends now. Press it and make sure the quilt is laying flat. It doesn't matter the size, just as long as it's laying flat. You can use the ruler and follow the one edge. Just cut right through all of the fabric. If you have all of the little ends sticking out here, you're going to be able to trim that right off. Trim off both of those ends. The key to sewing on the borders is just that this is going to be a straight line. It doesn't have to be an equal line to the other side. So I've trimmed off anything that is hanging over, so I have a straight seam. I'm going to do the same to the other side. From here, we're going to be able to put on the last 2 borders. You're going to have lots hanging over on the outside, which is perfect because we're going to be able to trim it off when it's all done. So sew the next 2 borders on. I find that pressing these borders going to the outside really keeps it nice and flat. And now we can trim it down. We can use this edge right here. Just continue cutting up. Take the long ruler, have it match up that one edge, and you're going to be able to trim off this piece. You can do that to all 4 corners. And the top is now done. The quilt is not going to have a binding on it. If you want to put a binding on, that's fine. But there's a really easy way to put the batting, and have all of the edges come out really nice without putting a binding on it. The 2 extra pieces of fabric are going to go for the back. The back of the quilt is going to have a seam running down the middle of it. And that seam is going to be a turning seam. To make sure we have enough fabric, just overlap the 2 seams. You can overlap them about 1 inch. The measurement's not important. Place the quilt top over top. You need to make sure that we have lots of space left over. I know I have enough backing, so I'm going to put my right sides together, matching up a straight edge. I want to leave an opening in the center at about 6 inches. So we're going to stitch a little bit on one side, a little on the other, with a 6-inch opening. I would recommend stitching more than 1/4 inch. You could do a 1/2 inch, you can even do 1 inch. It's going to give them an opportunity to sew a larger seam. So we're going to stitch down, stop, and then stitch on the other side. I just did a 1-inch seam. Now I will have a hole in the back. When I open them up, take that seam and press it open. That's going to give you this little opening right in the center. This little opening is going to be a turning point, and then afterwards we'll stitch that together. We're going to make a quilt sandwich now, put all of those layers together. Here's the backing with that little opening. We need to make the backing the same size as the top. Make sure this opening is somewhere in the center of the quilt so that the sewn edges are going to be caught in the seam allowance. Put the right sides together and trim them so they're both the same size. So you can just put a couple of pins, have the edges cut with the scissors, or you can use a rotary cutter. Now that both the sides are the same size, we need to just pin them together so that when we move them, they're not going to shift. Put a couple of pins so that the pin heads are sticking to the outside. Now that those layers are secured, we're going to be able to lay it over top of a piece of batting. I would recommend using a cotton batting or a batting that is very thin, not a fluffy one like a polyester, because the machine is going to have to stitch right over top of this batting, and that fluffy polyester one might get caught in the feed dogs. Take that quilt front, flip it onto the batting. So we now are looking at that opening. If you peek inside, you're going to see that that's the right side of the quilt. Now we can transfer these pins and hold all of those layers together. You can even put some extra pins. All 3 layers are going to be stitched together. This batting is going to be on the back. So if you were to have something very puffy like this, the feed dogs might get caught. You're going to be able to stitch all the way around. There are 2 ways you can treat the corner. You can stitch those corners square, or you can round them off. You can use anything that has a circle. Place the circle right onto the corner. Just draw that circle mark. With a pair of scissors, I'm just going to lift it up off the batting and trim off that round. And just fold that batting back on top and replace the pin. You can now bring this to the machine and stitch all the way around using a 1/4 inch seam allowance or whatever they're comfortable using. You can also hand stitch this on. Once it's stitched all the way around, we can trim up all this extra batting. A pair of scissors really does work the best for this. Just trim following the fabric edge, so all 3 layers are now going to be the same measurement. Now we get to reveal the quilt by turning the quilt right side out from this opening. The batting ends up being inside. We have the back and the front. Poke out the corner, make sure all the edges are coming out. We're going to be able to press this flat. Don't use the iron going back and forth because you don't want anything to stretch now. We want to keep it the same size, so just take that iron and you're going to push it down, lift up, push it down and lift up. You can do that from the one side and do it from the other side. Just make sure that those 2 seams, which is the opening, stay touching each other. When you're done giving a good press, it's going to lay nice and flat. You'll need to close this opening. Just take the quilt and fold it in half right along that open side. You're going to be able to just do a whip stitch to close that. I have a video on a whip stitch. I'll put a link in the description for you. You will not need to stitch the batting, just the 2 pieces of fabric together. There are many different ways we can quilt it. If you put the walking foot on, you can stitch all the way around and in the blocks or beside the blocks. You can do a big X through the center. You can hand stitch it. You can even add buttons, and that would be its quilting. So you could stitch a button on each of the squares going through all of the layers, and that is going to hold all those pieces together. Or you put buttons right in the corners. You can also just tie it, where you're going to take a couple of threads and just tie a knot throughout the quilt. We now have one little finished quilt. This could be used as a doll quilt. It could be used as a placemat. It could also be used to pin little memorabilia pins on. You could also stitch on little badges. So it's just not a little quilt. It is a piece of memory. So not only do you have a little quilt when you're finished, but you've learned skills along the way. And the most important thing is, you've built a memory. And I'd like to thank Brandy for allowing me to share Kristys Quilt pattern with you. And thank you for joining me today on Sew Very Easy. Feel free to subscribe, and as always, come on back. Let's see what we're sewing next time in the sewing room. Bye for now.